All right. Yeah, thank you very much, Quentin. My name is Nick Olson, and yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and to do the second of these webinars. Yeah, it's a great opportunity for us to educate you about what we do at PredictWind. We're just from across the ditch, and yeah, if you didn't join last week, I'm pretty happy about the fact that I've actually sailed at your yacht club before. So yeah, it's great to be able to do these webinars. So today we're really gonna last week we sort of talked about sort of the tools that and forecasting tools that you'd use when you are local, and then today we're going to start talking about the tools that we'd use when we want to do passages, really. So we're going to start at, if we were doing, day passages or sailing to the Pacific Islands or sailing around the world, whatever you want to do. We've got a bunch of those tools for you. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the comms, and to be fair, some of it will probably come across a little bit advertorial, but with the satellite products and other products around it that we do sell, we do that because they are tools that communication tools that work well with what we do weather-wise. And the reality is having the being able to get your weather when you're offshore is critical to your safety. So that's really what we're about. The satellite products that we do, we're heavily involved with them because we want people to get weather. It's not a profitable side of our business, but it's it's a great way for us to give people the full solution. So I'm going to cover some of that stuff. Then we'll look at departure planning and weather routing, and we'll also look at some ocean data. And then we'll talk about, when we do that, we'll talk about some polars, which is how fast the software thinks your boat's going to go. And we'll also maybe touch on a bit of ocean data, but there's a bunch of things that I'll introduce within the weather routing and departure planning that we want to look at to sort of start getting our head around how that all works. So enough of seeing my mug. You won't have to see that for the next 45 minutes, really, apart from the Zoom makes it show up on the side of the screen. But I will jump into a screen share and we will get underway. So we probably don't need to go through this. I'll just skip to the next page. We talked about weather models last week, and we'll talk about that during the chat today, and then which will be good because I'll probably reiterate some of the stuff I've mentioned. You'll see here we've got this little banner for the Go Exec. We're going to talk about that, and we'll just flick over to the apps. So today we're still probably going to mainly look at the PredictWind website, which is the same as the PredictWind app. But a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about is actually relative to the offshore app. So, and what I mean by that is the tools that we'll be talking about in here, and some of the stuff that I'll show you how we set it up and how, why we would do that. We will, it's relative to the offshore app. Next week, we are going to basically talk about this offshore app full time, so how you use that when you're offshore. Today, we're more going to talk about the tools. So to use these tools offshore, we do have you do have to have SATCOMs. Of course, we live in the world where Elon Musk has done something amazing and put all these satellites up in the sky. I'm not sure some people maybe don't agree with it, but it is pretty amazing. And Starlink is an amazing satellite network that he's creating, and the reality is if there's an affordable way to use that offshore, it could be something amazing. I know that there's sort of some leaders out there at the moment that are sort of crossing oceans with it, and they've got service at the moment. But they do have maritime plans with Starlink, and I think they will geofence all the RV users pretty soon, which is a bit of a bummer. But at the same time, there's some limitations to that service. It's fixed to your boat. You can't take it with you in an emergency situation. It's amazingly fast, but the reality is that it's not. Whilst it works beautifully now, it's probably not. We'll see what happens in the next little while. But at the moment, we are in the world of Iridium still, and there's a lot of great things about the Iridium products that work for sailors and have done for the last at least 10 years, or how long have I been at PredictWind? 8 years. We've had the Iridium Go, and that's been amazing. It's given people the ability to get weather anywhere in the world, and actually, be safe, make good decisions. And that's really what we're about. They've just updated that product, and there's a new one out, and it's called the Iridium Go Exec. And that's sort of, a lot better than the old one. It's kind of like updating your iPhone from an iPhone 7 to an iPhone 14, or it still does email, and you can still get weather on the old one. It's kind of like you can still take photos and whatnot on the old one, but the new one's just faster and better. It's a pretty cool product. So far as we're concerned, I've got one sitting here with me there. So it's a lot bigger. This is the old one. This is the old Go, new Exec. You can open up the Exec and it just works. And depending on what happens with Starlink, or even if you have Starlink, you probably want one of these devices as well, because in an emergency situation, you want to be able to take something with you. You want to be able to use voice. And the reality is not everyone wants to have the Starlink type connection if it comes to full fruition, and they probably want something like this. Compared to the old Go, this is really awesome. I've used it a bit, and I think it's cool. And you can do a whole lot of stuff. And what we're talking about here is you can do this literally right now anywhere in the world. If you were gonna go to, the polars, the ends of the earth, you literally can use it anywhere. It's reliable, it works, and it gives you a really good functionality. If you want to look at this, come and have a look at it. I'm not going to bang on about it. There are some cool things that we do with it, which this here, the data hub, this is the products bit of the webinar, by the way. So the data hub works if you had Starlink, whether you had an Exec, an Iridium Exec, it gives you a whole lot of cool stuff. It means that you can do your GPS tracking. If you've never seen the PredictWind GPS tracking, you can sort of sail the whole way around the world, or over to Noumea and back, or whatever you want to do, and your family and friends can watch you, or whoever you want. You can have a public URL so that they can see your web page with your tracking on it. You can do little blog posts on it, and it's actually a great safety feature if people can see you when you're offshore, friends and family. We've definitely had situations where people have noticed that the boat stopped, and yes, they have had a problem. There's actually a cool story. An Australian chap, he was sailing, I don't know whether he was sailing around Australia or what, but I think he was going across the top. Have you call it the Great Australian Bight, or I don't know, whatever that bit is up the top. And I think he was going across there, and he was sailing solo, and he fell off the boat, and he was tethered on, and he actually had to cut himself free, because otherwise being dragged by the boat was going to drown him. And he had a personal EPIRB on him, which was one of the reasons he was here to tell me the story. And the other reason that he is here to tell the story is that his tracker on the boat was still going. So when the EPIRB went off, they could see where the EPIRB was. They contacted the people that were on his list of people to contact in an emergency, and they said, "Oh, yep, well, he's got a tracker," and so they could see that the boat was sailing away from where he was, and so they actually flew out and picked him up out of the water. It was pretty amazing story. It's on our website in our news section if you want to go and have a look at it. I was just like, when I spoke to him on the phone, I was just like, the craziest thing I've ever heard. But yeah, anyway, digress. GPS tracking's cool. So the Data Hub can do that, whether you've got Starlink, Exec, or any other higher or mid-band to high-speed satellite connection. The Data Hub can do a whole lot of really cool stuff for you. And again, it's about giving you the tools to have a better time on the water. And in that, it can also do a predict mail thing. If you've ever used the old Iridium Go, you would probably be very excited to use this new feature that we have called, or new product that we have called Predict Mail. So anyway, let's not get stuck into that stuff. So last week we talked about, and if you do want to know more about those products, by all means, go and have a look at our website. They're super cool. Ask our support team. I'll link you to that at the end. And so anyway, we talked about a bunch of the stuff in here, the things that you would use when you're, going dinghy sailing or just to sail around the harbour, doing harbour racing, Friday night rum racing, whatever you want to do. We went through a bunch of those tools. But the reality is what lots of us want to do is go places, sail our boats, have an adventure, sail to different countries, sail around the world, cruise the Pacific, whatever it is that you want to do. And we have these really awesome tools to allow you to make good decisions and stay safe on the water. And that's everything from having an enjoyable passage where you don't leave at the wrong time and end up in crappy weather like we've got here in Auckland. You can probably hear the rain on the roof of my office in the background. But yeah, if there's a difference between going out there and getting beat up and going out there and doing your best to actually get the right conditions, have a safe passage, and everybody's happy. So I think in the description that Quentin had for this, he wanted to talk about standard and pro features. I'll do my best to try and talk about those. Obviously we're a paid service. If you want to use these high-end tools, if you want to go across oceans, we put massive amounts of resource into creating this stuff, and like any shop we pay for, you pay for it. But so the weather routing, to do weather routing or departure planning, you need a standard or pro sub. And if you put it in context of what you might spend on sales or buying a boat or having to sell your boat because you've had a terrible time with your family out on the water, it's pretty cheap. So what are these tools that we're talking about? So we've got weather routing and departure planning. We can probably even talk about the AIS data. I just mentioned tracking. So yeah, and the ocean data. So ocean data is ocean currents, where shortly we will be, I'm told that it's next week, we will be having the high resolution tidal currents. I think I mentioned that last week. I mentioned it quite a lot because I'm super excited about tidal currents. So that'll be, coastal stuff. We will have the tidal currents. So, but then ocean data is ocean currents, and up the coast of Australia, there's some pretty good currents, and they can make a big difference to your time on the water. They can help assist you in your passage, and they can also make things horrible. So what we're going to start with is I'll just have a brief look at AIS data. We can look at, and we will talk about this next week as well. Obviously, I've got, I need to, how about I change my location to Australia, get with the program. And I'll zoom out. You'll see here, I've got all these boats. I think I even talked about AIS last week. But you'll see that we can start to see traffic. You know, these green boats going up and down here, they are commercial traffic. And it's something that you want to be aware of when you're on the water. What are these guys? I think yellow ones are fishing boats usually. Status unknown, but he's doing, oh yeah, he's fishing. So where fishing fleets are, where marine traffic is, you know, that's what you want to know, where these commercial lanes are. And as you head out into the Pacific, knowing where fishing fleets are, if you guys are going to head north, obviously there's a lane of commercial traffic up here. But, you know, you come up and you start looking at these areas and you want to know where these fishing boats are. And you see one of them and there could be, they could have nets out, all sorts of things. Knowing where this fishing traffic is super important because you can actually route around it if you know where they are. And so you can see this in the offshore app. It's a pro feature, seeing where that is. And so, you know, knowing where these fleets are and the traffic is, you could either, if you're going through a high traffic zone, you might want to have more people on watch. You might have 2 people on watch instead of 1, or however it is, or just being aware that you're going to sail through that traffic zone. And you can, as I zoom out, you can see more and more. The map changes dynamically. As I zoom in, you'll see more boats. Anyway, we'll talk about that more once we get into weather routing next week, probably, with that stuff. GPS tracking, I mentioned that, and we'll talk about that more next week. So let's jump into departure planning. So before you do any passages, whether you're heading up the coast, you know, a day trip, or whether you are crossing over to New Caledonia and then you're going to head off into the Pacific, or whether you're going to go around the top and head through the Indian Ocean, you know, any time that you're preparing to depart on a journey, you should be using a departure planning tool. It makes a huge difference. Obviously, before we jumped into this, we might look at seasonal stuff. I don't know whether I talked about that. If you want to look at seasonal data, you can go into local knowledge. We have, you can put a passage in there and it will give you seasonal data like you see in pilot charts. And you can sort of work out times of the year where the prevailing winds from, etc. And so the same stuff that you see in pilot charts, we are actually going to put an actual pilot chart in here, so you can see that historical data and help you make that sort of initial decision. Oh, this is the time of year I want to go. Obviously, that information is pretty accessible anywhere on the internet, and through cruising groups like you guys have. You know, that's a, you know, of course you want to ask other people. So, you know, you do that stuff and then you go, okay, well, then I want to, you know, I'm going to leave in May to go to New Caledonia. And then you go, well, okay. And then you'll start looking at big picture stuff. You would go into, you know, your forecast maps and you will, you know, look at the different weather systems, and you'd want to be doing it, you know, now and understanding, you know, starting looking at these weather patterns and seeing what's going on. And then you might go, okay, all right, I think, you know, this is the time we want to go, and I'm going to start running my departure planning. And so this is where we come and use this tool. So before we can run any departure planning, we need to come over here and we can go to departure planning preferences. And this is the same as weather routing preferences. You know, I could come over here to weather routing and I could do it through there. It wouldn't matter. But I'll go back to departure planning just so I don't lose my way as I go. And I come in here to planning preferences. And now we're going to talk about something that's really important if you're going to use these tools. So here we have boat polar. So if you don't know what a polar is, that's fine. We're going to talk about it. A boat polar is how fast we think your boat is going to go in any given wind condition and angle. So we can also do it for power boats. But generally for sailing boats, we're going to have these boat polars here. And so whatever your true wind angle is, the wind speed, and whatever your boat speed is at that true wind angle, we want to know. And so then the software can calculate where you will be throughout your passage with a pretty good degree of accuracy. And it means that it can give you the right information to go places. If you go in yacht racing, this is 101, super essential. So we come in here, we look at we see we've got these 4 different types of polars here: predefined, power, sail, and advanced. So let's start with predefined. So what that is here we have this list. And I click on this here, and I've got this list of boats. So there's a lot of boats in here. There's also up the top here, there's a bunch of generic ones that are, if you had a 45-foot catamaran, 55-foot, whatever, monohull, a whole bunch of boats down here. This is always my favorite part of the webinar, where I pretend that I've got some really cool boat. Well, what should we get? I know that you guys like catamarans, and so do I. Let's get an outtrimmer. A leopard. Oh no. Oh yeah. Oh, let's get one of these naughty cheeks. So I can choose my boat. So if your boat's not there, if your boat's there or your boat's not there, if your boat's there, you can choose your boat. But if your boat's not there, you will know that there's a boat that's pretty similar to your one. And so you can choose that boat that's similar to your one performance-wise. But we don't need to get too caught up on that, because we can go, all right, so that's not exactly the same as my boat. I know that my boat's a bit faster doing this. I'm faster upwind. I can sail a few degrees higher than those guys, or I'm faster reaching, whatever. So you can go copy to advanced polar, and then I can click on advanced. And then here we can see what I was mentioning before. Don't worry if this is all just going a bit. But here we have true wind speed, 6 knots, 8 knots, 10, 12, 14, up to 30. And then we have the 2 columns of 0, which we don't actually need anymore, because that was something that we used to have in the routing, where the router needed those 2 columns of 0. And so then we have our first true wind angle. And so this is our probably, as high as you can sail upwind. Racing boats, you'll see these vary throughout the wind speeds. This is a pretty generic polar by the looks of things. So let's say we're doing, we've got 10 knots of boat speed here at 45 degrees true wind angle, which sounds pretty high for a cat. I'm pretty sure this is a cat. And it's doing 5 knots. Sounds pretty, 5.13, seems very precise, but sounds pretty realistic to me. 60 degrees, we go a bit faster. If I was going 70 degrees true wind angle, and as we go up in the degrees, we sort of peak out at 100, and obviously at that lower wind speed, 10 knots, starts to go a bit slower once we go a bit deeper. So that's all represented over here in this polar curve. And we don't need to get too worried about it. If you want, this is definitely something that you should delve into, something that our support team can help you with if you need to, but getting your polars right is really important. So any boat that I sail on, I will make sure I have a pretty good crack at getting these polars right. You don't even need to, most people know the angles they want it, that they sail at. They know in the wind speed what speed their boat does. If you sail on your boat any reasonable amount of time, you'll have a pretty good idea of this stuff. You can see this boat starts going a lot quicker as it gets windy. It I wonder whether it can actually do 17 knots. And so that's the thing, is you want to come in here, even if you've chosen that predefined polar, you want to come in here and make sure that these polars are what you sail at. So you may, like often the polars come from the designer, you may not sail at that speed, you know, or you've got another ton of gear on your boat, so you don't sail at that speed. So if all of that, you find that all a bit overwhelming, you can just stick to the predefined and you can just change the percentages of it. Just, you know, I'm going to sail at 90% of every one of those numbers. Something we'll talk about later is, you'll see here we can have upwind, downwind, and at night. So you can change the polar so that at night, often you might reduce sail and sail more conservatively, or it's just harder to sail at night. I mean, I've done a lot of night sailing, racing, and it's hard work, really hard work. I don't believe that anyone can sail as well at night as they can during the day. So you can adjust your polars to reflect that. If that's all a bit complicated, you can just choose the sail polar and you put upwind at 50 degrees true wind angle, 90 and 160 true wind angle, and that's in what the boat would do in 15 knots. And especially if you've got a boat that basically that's all it does. You know, once it gets over about 12 knots, it does 5 knots upwind, does 6 knots downwind. That's what it does. It's, you know, you've got a pretty big displacement vessel or whatever, and that's fine. And this can accommodate that as well. So we will go back to the predefined because there's something important that I want to mention. And so we've set our boat up for the wind. So, you know, wind's what drives us generally. Just for any power boaters there, sorry, I won't leave you out. We're about to make a big update to this because obviously we're all sailors, PredictWind, and we, you know, all this is described. I mean, what power boat has a VMG downwind? So we're actually doing a big update to this. Had some really great input from some great power boaters to make this and even put some fuel economy stuff in there for power boaters. So anyway, we'll go back to sailing and our predefined polar. And so we've set everything up for the wind. But something else that we want to deal with is obviously the wave state. So the waves state is, you know, depending on who you are, you know, for cruising, wave state's critical. You know, this is probably what I was alluding to earlier is, you know, between a good trip and a bad trip, sure, it gets windy, it can be horrendous, but a lot of it's to do with the wave state. So we have done a big update to our wave polar stuff. We're the only service in the world that does this, and even personalized routers, from the feedback I've had, miss a lot of the stuff that we can give you in here. And so what we want to do is we want to come in here and set up our wave polar. Not this bit, this is the old wave polar. So we have that turned off. You'll see if I turn that on, you could go in here, you could put all these percentages in about how you went, you know, in different true wind speeds and the wave height. But it was actually quite basic, even though it's called advanced. It probably was advanced when it was created. So what this wave polar here is doing is we actually got a Australian gentleman, again, we seem to use a lot of Australians, created a, in fact, he's from Perth, created a whole lot of hydrodynamic models. And so when we put these, you know, so it knows what boat polar I've chosen, right? And so it knows what my beam is and what my displacement is. Excuse me, I'll just have a drink. Knows what all my boat dimensions are. And so you can come in here and change these yourself. I mean, if we had a lot of gear on board, we might be a wee bit different from what the boat design was. And so we want to put that displacement in so that the the modeling can understand that. So you can, you know, if any of these parameters are wrong, I mean, probably you don't need to change many of these if you've chosen predefined, but if you were just setting up your own polar or you had a custom boat, you may want to put these in and it will help the wave modeling. If you don't know what any of those things mean, there is a little description here. It does know whether you've got a monohull or a catamaran. And there is about, as I mentioned before, there will be an update coming in for the powerboaters. And so that'll actually have wind resistance and stuff in it. It's pretty clever. When this idea was first pitched at one of our team meetings about 1.5 years ago, I just thought that was crazy. But it's actually one of my favorite things in PredictWind now is, I'm going to talk about this in this webinar and the next one because I love it. Because it gives you such critical information. So anyway, so we've got our boat set up there. We've set up our boat, our polar for our atmospheric conditions for the wind. And then we've set it up for the wave. We can come down here and we can set up the weather routing to have different depths to avoid. So you don't want a weather routing tool that's going to send you over land because it's giving you an inaccurate route. And also, you know, shallow water, we don't really want to, why would we take those risks unless we were really pushing it and racing? So we can change that, you know, we can put it on 10 meters, 5 meters, whatever we want. It's using a contour from CMAX, which is a pretty well-known hydrographic mapping service. And then we can also add the tidal and ocean currents. Both the standard and pro versions will use the tidal and ocean currents. If there's tidal in the area that you're routing, it will use it. But you see more of the information on the pro version. You can choose which current model you're using in your routing, but let's not get bogged down in that. That's a pretty fine detail. Especially around Australia. Yes, you can have a look at the different models, but you'll see that they're pretty similar. There's definitely not the variance that you see in atmospheric models. We have some advanced routing adjustments down there. We put that in there for the IMOCA sailors. Let's not worry about it. All right, we've looked at this page for long enough. Let's come over here to the departure planning page. I will check the time. 9:36. 25 minutes. All right. So we have our start. There's this green waypoint here. You see, as I move it around, we get our lat long. Excuse me. You'll see here, if I move it around, I can see my lat long. If I come over here, I could manually put in my lat long for my start waypoint and my end waypoint if I wished. I could add waypoints as well to the route, you know, and I could actually put a port or starboard waypoint in there if I wanted. But ideally, I don't want to put waypoints in there. I just want to have my start and finish. I can save my waypoints, do a whole bunch of things in there. So I'm going to start here. Green is your start, red is your destination. I can come up here and I could change my start time. I'm in Auckland, so if I wanted to, you know, I could change that to any of the time zones I wanted. If you're in the offshore app, it will use the time zone of your computer, and I can have my start time either as now or I could put it as a time in the future. Let's just run it from now. But obviously, if I was using the departure planning tool, I'd probably put it for tomorrow because I wouldn't be planning much if I was leaving now. And I can space my departures. So I could do that if I was doing even during a coastal passage, you know, leaving 3 hours later could be a really good idea. And so you can change that right up to 1 hour, out to 24. For the purpose of this, we'll look at 24 because we're looking at doing a passage over to New Caledonia. So, and that's going to give me 4 departures leaving now, tomorrow, the next day, the next day. So let's just come over here and click on that button. I'll close this box. And so I'm clicking on calculate route. And you'll be like, oh, why is it taking so long? And so what it's doing here, and this is really important to know, is it's actually calculating my polars and my wave polar, and it's using the highest resolution wind data that it can get its hands on, and currents and wave data, and it's crunching that all together and giving me my weather route. If I were to download all of those parameters and then crunch my weather route, it would be about 50 megabytes of data. And I didn't check this before I ran that, and really exciting to see all these warnings. And so what these are here is these are warnings, and you will see here we have roll, vertical acceleration, and wind against current. So lot to take in there. Let's just work our way through it. So we've run this departure plan, and when I look at it, looks like most of them, this one seems to be giving us this crazy route. Let's just scroll through a bit here. So the first one, actually maybe the first one's not too bad. I know he's got a couple of warnings there, but we'll have a look at what they are. So we can look at this. You can see the boats leaving at different times, and that's our different departures. Wonderful. And you're probably going, how on earth do I use that? Well, we don't actually really use it in here. We come up here to this button that says tables, and we click on that. Phew, but easier. Departure planning. This is where we use the departure planning tool in the tables. Yes, we can go back and have a look at the maps and flick through the different times and the different models, but really this is where you use it. You come in here to the tables and you look at this table. If we wanted to, we could, this is an average of all 4 models. I don't know whether we saw before that you could choose the models, but we've got the 4 global models here. This is the ECMWF, the GFS, the UKMO, and the SPIRE model, and they're actually averaged together here. And the reason we do that is it just gives us a much more simple look at it. If I click on this button over here, you'll see all of a sudden we go back to something a bit more complicated. If you wanted to dig into that, it'd be cool, but we sort of think that actually this summary here is a lot better way to look at it, because we're trying to choose a time to depart. And so if you look here, we've got the passage time. You see where they varies a little bit across them. You know, this one's the quickest one to get us there. This one's the second quickest. I don't have the motoring turned on, so there is an option there that you can turn the motoring on. You can, you know, say, well, if my boat goes below 4 knots, I'm actually going to flick the motor on and we're going to motor at 6 knots or whatever you want to do. And you'll see here across the different passages, our maximum wind speed. So we're talking about averages here. You know, maximum wind speed, minimum wind speed across all, you know, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And then we've got gusts. And you'll see here day 3 and day 4, you know, 40, 39 knot gusts in a weather model is definitely getting up there. Weather models, you know, once you get above 30 knots, things are starting to get pretty real. So that's definitely worth keeping in mind. Obviously, there's plenty of times that you're going to get that when you're offshore. That's what happens sometimes when you're offshore. But, you know, we can try and mitigate that stuff if we want to. And CAPE, that's an atmospheric thing. I mentioned CAPE last week, convective available potential energy. That's one of our thunderstorm indicators. So we get a lot less of it if we leave on day 4, but we have that wind. Time upwind. Well, we're meant to be going cruising and enjoying ourselves, right? And we're spending more than these 3 departures, we're spending more than half our time sailing upwind. Doesn't sound like fun. Generally, when we're going cruising, we want to be reaching and sailing downwind and having, 1 or 2% of the upwinds. So maybe none of these departure times are good. We come down here and we can see a bit more of a breakdown of our time spent in the different wind speeds. And then, again, time upwind in more than 15 knots, and then time with wind against current. It's not something, big difference in our sea state when we're sailing with the wind against the current. Something we really want to be aware of and nice to look at in here. Wave heights, yep, we want to know about that, but then we've got to, and that's important to know. And then we come down here, and this is what I was getting excited about before with the wave routing stuff, as we call it. And so we see here time less than 4 degrees roll. And you're probably sitting there going, what's this guy on about? 4 degrees roll, my boat heels over 25-30 degrees. This is a number that is the root mean square of roll. We don't need to know what that means. We just need to know that this is a measure. And so the boffins have given us the information that if it is less than 4 degrees of roll, it's all right. I've actually had feedback from customers, actually a gentleman that sailed from New Caledonia to Queensland. He did this great series of videos. I'll send them to Quentin if I can find them. Where when we first released this feature, he actually made a video about it because he'd actually emailed us and said, "Oh, I think you should put wave steepness in as a great thing. People aren't paying enough attention to the wave state." And I said, "Oh, well, how about you have a look at this?" And so, yeah, so 91% of the time, 99, 84, 72% of the time, we're in what we consider okay conditions. We would run our weather routing to see how much of the time, is it we look at that in more detail. But then we have this time that we're over this threshold. Not saying this isn't saying you shouldn't do it, but it's like we're trying to choose a departure time, right? So it's hard to move around the boat. It's difficult and safe. You're getting thrown around a lot. So we can use this differently when we're offshore. If we see this, we get this information when we're on a passage, but we're trying to plan our departure time. So at the moment, this day 2 is probably, we might go back and have a look at that. Vertical acceleration, lifting, so up and down. I didn't believe them when they said that you can make anyone seasick. Apparently you can. That's coming from someone that doesn't get seasick. And apparently they did a whole lot of testing on some poor naval officers in the US Army or Navy. And you can make anyone seasick apparently, and vertical acceleration is what does it. You do, if you want to keep your crew and your family happy, you should be paying attention to this. It's a big deal. None of these look overly pleasant. This one's going to be really windy. Yes, we get less vertical acceleration, but 32% of the time on a 4-day trip? Doesn't sound like fun. So we can use these tools to make smarter decisions. Slamming, that's actually your boat slamming over the waves. You may get this before it's indicated on here. This is a pretty high threshold. This is, boat, when it shows up in here, it's boat breaking stuff. You don't want to go there. You don't even want 1%. Polar percentage due to influence of the waves. So this is whether it's speeding up or slowing you down. Not so critical here, but when we get into the weather routing side of things, it is. But this stuff here, this is a pro version feature. And if it were me, I would get this every day. It's very, very good, and it's very, very clever, and we've diluted it into a way that's really digestible. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, and I hope no one knows him, so I'm not going to mention his name because he is Australian. We have a rally that goes out of New Zealand here, and they went to Australia, to Fiji last year. And the day that they left, I emailed the rally organizer because we work with them, and I said, why did you guys leave today? And she said, oh, that's what our rally weather router told us. And I said, oh, okay, that's cool. I said, I mean, I can see why he did it, but I said, I'd be really interested to hear what the feedback is on day 5 and 6. And because on day 5 and 6, I just ran a route up to Fiji when I saw that they'd left. And I can see on day 5 and 6 that they were going to run into some nasty conditions using this wave routing tool. And sure enough, there were reports of all the boats about how horrible it got and how not nice it was. And they were very, very happy to get to Fiji. No incidents, so great stuff, but made it really horrible for everyone. So yeah, using this departure planning tool can help you leave at the right time. Personally, I wouldn't leave at any of these times. I just think that this information here, I look at the time upwind, I look at the roll, the vertical acceleration is probably my biggest factor for it being a no-go. It's just not going to be a nice trip. We're going cruising, we're there to enjoy it. So on that note, let's move on. Let's come over here to ocean data. We'll just click on the download button. We're doing the same passage. If I was in the offshore app, I could download all this stuff. And so next week we will talk about this all some more. I'll probably cover some of the same stuff again. You'll probably hear me talk about wave routing again because I'd love it. But ocean data is something that we need to know about. So again, we're calculating the route, but this time we've got a weather route leaving right now. So this was our first time. Why is my current model not showing up? Oh, I know why. So we'll just zoom out on this a little bit and we'll just talk about, I don't really want, let's not get too much into weather routing because we can do that more next week. But you'll see there that, this is off your coast. These are your sailing waters. And there's a lot of current there, let's zoom back in on this. If I click on that 2.6 knots of current, and then we go here, 0.1, but then we come over here, 1.5, and then, we're doing this, what seems like quite simple passage, and we have got, we've got current going this way here, we've got it heading, southwest here. It's just, there's a lot going on here. You want to know this information because it will help you with your decision making. It will help you understand why, you might be like, oh, it's only 15 knots. Why is this wave routing say it's going to be so, so horrible? And this is why, because there's a lot of current out there. And so knowing what these currents are doing is really important. And it's, the whole way across, there's these different, current patterns, and, wherever we go, they're there. So super awesome to be able to see this. The weather routing will try and use them to your advantage. The wave routing will tell you that it's going to make your life horrible. You can come in here and look at it yourself And then what we can do is we can actually flick over to the weather routing, which is really the sort of the, once we've chosen our departure, the weather routing is the #1 tool. And we can flick between those tools and see, and if we were in the offshore app, this would be happening instantly. And so, we can see that wind's coming across here. We've got the current coming down here. Certainly not as bad as if we had a southerly, but you can sort of see how that's affecting our routing. So let's go back to the weather routing and have a brief chat about it. Next, what's the time? Yep. So I know that you guys will be getting hungry. I learned that last week. So you can see here we've got our wind. We can look at the wind. We can run through the route. We can look at different weather models. We mentioned last week about having the different models and how you deal with them. This is a beautiful situation. Let's flick over to a different model, because you see here the PWE, so it's blue, and the boat is on it. And then I come over here and I flick over to, let's say, ECMWF, and got zoomy hands going on my magic mouse. Zoom in a bit more here. And the reality here is with all of the weather models, they are in this situation, they are all saying the same thing. And that is a very good thing for us, because it gives us certainty around the forecast. And we would 100%, we would follow this route. We would call this guy the outlier. If we wanted to, we can even hide him. We won't, but we could hide him, and we can look through the route here and see what's going on. You see here, we've gone, so what's the time now? 22. By here, we would be updating our weather routing. So we would get a new model run, and we would get new weather routing updated on the new forecast. And chances are up here where they start to diverge, that as we went through our next 2 model runs, these would actually align. We would get more alignment with the models, unless it was a really uncertain situation. In here, we can look at the different weather models. We can change our display. We can look at the rain. I think I mentioned last week about why we want to see the rain. We want to see the rain so we can see frontal bands. We can look at the wave. We can look at the gust. We can look at the cape and see what's going on. So the thing here with the wave is that what the information you're actually getting in the wave routing is smarter than what you're seeing here. So what you're seeing here is the combined swell and wind wave. So all of the parameters are combined together. What you see in the and is calculated in the wave routing is the wind wave, primary swell, secondary swell, and tertiary swell. And I actually, the Down Under rally run by John Hembro, he actually did a rally about 3 or 4 years ago, and he said to me that they had pretty good conditions to cross, but he said to me that they had a different primary swell and a different secondary swell were running at different directions, and it made for a very uncomfortable trip. So that's again why I get so excited about the wave routing. You'll see we've got our different warnings along the weather route here. And, for any of those departure times, if we did want to depart on one of those days, we could have chosen that start time and, come in here and started to analyze it. I think I will wrap it up there in case there's any questions. And and we'll see you next week. Stop sharing.
Good, Nick. I've just unmuted this end. So just a question from myself. I've got a sea wind.
Yep.
And we don't seem to have. Well, last time I looked, didn't seem to have sea wind 1160s on your polar. How do how do you gather polar information, and then how do you put that into your system?
So if your boat's not on there and you can get, so generally the designer should, well, 100% should have a polar for it. So yeah, that's how you go about it. Is you go, I've got one of your boats, I would like the polar, please, and they give it to you, and we will input it in our system. We need it in a table format, and yeah, so similar to what you saw in there, but we can flip it around and do things with it if needed. But yeah, we just need the polar from a designer, or sometimes people actually have polars for their own boats. Something else I should have mentioned is the data hub. It's not actually released yet. It's super close. The data hub can record all the stuff off your enemy A feed. So, and then from that feed, it can go into our system and actually create your polar and update your polar. So there's a couple of ways to do it, or you could record all the information and create your own polar.
Good stuff. All right, Steve, you got a question?
Yes.
Talk up loudly, because it has to go through the computer here.
Okay, I have two questions actually. First one is related to the wave model. You mentioned that it was a combination of the 4 or 3 waves, swell, primary swell, etc. Is there a way of us seeing on the model the maximum wave height as opposed to the swell height?
You're going to need to repeat that to me, Quentin.
Can you see the peak?
Yeah, so can someone go to the, I can't hear what he's saying.
Yeah, so in the wave model, was it something?
The peak of the waves.
So can you see the peak of the waves in the wave models?
Peak height of each, the swell or the peak of the wind wave.
So yeah, I think, you know, the peak height. I mean, on your wave models there, you do talk about wave heights, the percentage of waves at certain heights, don't you? And but I think you don't have peaks, and you certainly don't have timings between peaks.
No, there is period, but we don't have, you know, like I guess to draw an analogy on it, we don't have the same as what you'd have in the GUS model, for instance. You know, there isn't that data there. But there is, you know, obviously period is, I mean, I'll just show you.
So invariably what I've done, Steve, is, you know, I have a look at the wave models, and I have a look at, more especially, you know, if it's a 3 or 4 meter swell, if I've got a 10 or 12 second timing between peaks, then I know the boat's going to ride over those swells relatively comfortably.
Yes.
You know, but if that peak, or sorry, if that wavelength becomes 7 or 8 seconds, then you're going to have a particularly rough passage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's how I tend to look at it. What are we looking at here?
So I've gone into the weather routing, and so if we, you know, for instance, we can look at the wave period, and so we've got the wave period here for, you know, across the different models. But what we can do is we can actually, you know, we can go through and you can see the period of the wind wave, you know, so it's longer here and then it gets shorter. But we can actually see what the primary swell is, the period. And so the period of that is, you know, roughly 8 seconds there, and then gets bigger. Secondary, it's pretty short. Sorry, it's pretty long there, gets short. You know, so you can look at those different things. You know, I guess the shortest one's probably always going to be the wind wave, right? Well, not always, but yeah, but so you can see the period of the different wave states. And as you mentioned, you can come into here. I think I'm in the wave model. And so if I click anywhere on there, I can see the wave height, the wave direction, and the period. But no, we don't have a peak wave height.
I think you'll find as well, Steve, that when, you know, we just looked at the generic table today, there's a lot more detail in there. You can dive down into graphs that Nick was just showing you now. You can also have half hour, quarter hour by quarter hour reports on what kind of conditions you're likely to be, encountering on that trip, even with lat and longitude positions, so that you can set your waypoint on your boat to follow a certain route, for example. So
I can show you that.
There's a whole heap of information there in these type of reports here that Nick hasn't covered off on today. And
and we can come in here into this wave tab and look at any point on our trip and see that. And so you're talking about, if I were to click on, I think this is what you're talking about, if I were to click on there and see any point on the route as to that information, is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, but I was also talking about those reports that you just had up on the screen just now as well, Nick.
Oh, yes. So in the tables, yeah. So that does have the wave data there, but no actual peak data.
Okay.
And there was a second question.
Second question, Steve.
The question was actually in maps where you see the isobars. There's no actual in the highs and lows. There doesn't seem to be the hectopascal reading. So you can see the gradient across the isobars.
Yeah, I think, in this, so if you go to the settings there, here you go, you can set it to the isobars there. I think Nick's showing us now. And if you zoom out, you'll be able to see, all the...
is that what we mean?
Yeah, so to see the isobars and all that type of stuff.
I'm in the wave, so it's probably not doing a particularly good job.
So it shows the isobars, but it doesn't have any numerical information as to what...
Yeah, it does have numerical information. So anywhere I click on that, I can see the pressure. Sorry, I'm back on.
You actually have to click on. You can't see the high pressure center or the low pressure center. Just overall.
Yeah. So they spin different directions. So, which is a pretty solid indicator. I agree. And but so we do have the GMDSS stuff here, which shows you any significant lows or highs. For instance, there. But also, I understand what you're saying. There's not. So you're talking about a synoptic map. The closest thing we have to a synoptic map is what we have here with the GMDSS stuff being interpreted onto the map. And so I need to, if I went to the WinBar view, for instance, we get our isobars and we can see, our high pressure and etc. But I understand what you're saying about the L's and the H's.
And weather routing does tend to just have a restricted area that you're looking at. To see
to
understand the bigger picture, Steve, you've got to get out of weather routing altogether and just have a look at the weather models itself to see what's coming up and what's happening a few days out or likely to be impacting you in a few days out.
Yeah, 100%. And we can probably look at, I will talk about smaller scale and bigger scale stuff next week in the offshore app, because that's something that you can actually do in the offshore app with a few tips and tricks.
One other question over here. Sorry, do you want to pass the microphone over to the lady there, please? Talk up loudly, please.
Okay. 2 questions I wanted to ask. So when you're sailing real time, can it adjust your polars, or can it gather data from the way that you're sailing it to adjust your polars?
So can you adjust your polars if you use one of those set boat polars there? Can you adjust them, Nick? Is the question?
Yes. Short answer is yes. So if we come over here into routing preferences, so probably cover this a little bit more next week. So if I wanted to, I could actually, in the offshore app, I could change this polar completely. If I wanted to adjust my polar, the only adjustment I can make in the offshore app is to change the percentage. So if I, if I felt that we were always getting ahead of where we were, I can change this to 90 or 90, whatever we want. And so that will change the entire polar. And as I mentioned before, I could change it for at night as well. So that will scale the whole lot down or up if I wanted it to go faster. So yes, you can adjust it. You can completely change the polar to a different boat, which would seem an odd thing to do at sea. But I can't at this stage. You can't, come in and you can't come in and twiddle these numbers. You can change the percentages, which is generally pretty good. Polars are something I would implore anyone that's going to use it to start working on early. But yes, if you blew a sail out, for instance, you can definitely, you didn't have a downwind sail anymore, for instance, you could move that down.
The question I wanted to ask is, let's say you've got a reef you main, like reef 1, reef 2. If your genoa is damaged and you have to reel it in a little bit more, can you adjust that using the polars to see where you're going to be going and the rate at which you're going to be going?
Only with those generic numbers up there.
Okay.
I mean, what I've done on my boat is I've printed out this polar chart here, and as we've been sailing along, I had nothing bloody better to do with my time than put dots on the polar and see how different it is, and then once you've got a bit of data built up like that, you can then look at all the other polars of the other boats and see if there's something that better resembles your boat that is not the generic version, if you know what I mean.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Nick? Here we go. Can we just pass the microphone down here? Oh, very much.
Thanks, Nick, for another interesting seminar this evening. I've just got 2 questions. One's really in relation to last week. Do you know other charts or maps that indicate areas that you can actually acquire local buoy data and local weather station data? Is there any map that you put together that's easily accessible?
Did you hear that, Nick? There any other websites that
Yeah, because last week he was using
yeah. So on your local
buoy data.
Yeah, on your local knowledge page, Nick, you've got all the weather data coming off. Yeah, the buoys, let's say in Moreton Bay.
The observation.
The observations, correct. Sorry, that's correct. So the question is there any other website that you're aware of that data's available on, other than through PredictWind?
I think no, the honest answer is no. I mean, here in New Zealand, Met Service has some data. Coast Guard in New Zealand has some data. I'm sure that BOM has some data. We try and I don't know, in Australia, we have a thing here in New Zealand over VHF called nowcasting. I don't know whether that's a thing in Australia or not. We basically, any information that is there, we actually try and integrate it. So any data that we can find, we will try and integrate it if we can, and we're allowed to.
Okay. And your second question?
Yeah, I'll start with speaking. What sourcing are they using for their international currents? Is this coming from a pilot chart?
And what sourcing are you using for your international currents, Nick?
So there's 3 models there. So we have, where do they come from is probably not a question I can exactly answer. Off the top of my head, Mercator is, so there's 3 models. We have Mercator, RTOFS, and HICOM. They're all, I think the RTOFS is an American Navy model. I honestly can't remember where they all come from. There is actually an explanation on our website where they all come from. It's probably in the FAQs. For the tidal current modeling that we're going to do, that is, we have a partner here in New Zealand that does that are oceanographers, and they have put together all the modeling for us. It's taken about 1.5 years, and we're actually running all that modeling ourselves, and it's all validated, etc. So yeah, a lot of things, if we can do it ourselves, we will, but if there's a clear the international sources, etc., we will, and we can either buy or acquire that information other ways, data sharing, that's how we'll get it. Hope that answers that question. Sorry, I couldn't be more succinct.
Yeah, good, Nick. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think we're out of questions. So given it's 10 o'clock over in New Zealand, Nick's got a bottle of whiskey that he needs to get to pretty quickly. So once again, we thank you very, very much for your time this evening, Nick. And if we could all show our appreciation, please. And Nick, we look forward to seeing you again next week. And once again, many, many thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thanks for listening, and thanks for the great questions. It's really, really awesome. Cheers.